Wait, what's going on here?
He's gonna live with us.
I'm David Kim, 38 years old, and I just lived through what feels like the most expensive episode of a reality show nobody asked for. 3 months ago, I came back from a week-long business conference in Portland to find a complete stranger sitting in my kitchen, wearing my expensive bathrobe and eating my imported granola like he owned the place. This wasn't some home invasion. This was my wife Jessica's new boyfriend, who she'd apparently invited to move in permanently while I was away handling actual business. The guy's name was Kyle, because of course it was, and he had the audacity to greet me with, "Hey there, sport," while spooning the last of my organic breakfast into his mouth. Jessica stood by the coffee maker like she was about to deliver quarterly earnings to a board meeting, explaining their new arrangement. I could either accept that Kyle was now part of our household dynamic, keep quiet about it, and we could all coexist like civilized adults, or I could leave and take whatever personal belongings actually belonged to me. Standing there with my luggage still in hand, watching this stranger make himself comfortable in my kitchen, while my wife of 9 years explained how things were going to work now, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete clarity about what needed to happen next. Here's what neither Jessica nor Kyle understood about my little hobby business that Jessica had been mocking for the past 4 years. What started as weekend experiments in my garage had grown into Kim Eco Solutions, a sustainable packaging company that was currently valued at $14.20 million and employed 15 people across 2 states. More importantly, every major asset they assumed we jointly owned. The house, both cars, most of the furniture, even that expensive espresso machine Jessica insisted we needed, had been legally purchased through my corporation. Let me explain how we got here. 8 years ago, while Jessica was building her personal brand as a lifestyle consultant and spending money on retreats with names like the Authentic Self Workshop, I was in our garage trying to solve the styrofoam problem that's choking our oceans. She thought it was cute at first, the way you might find it charming when your husband takes up woodworking or brewing beer. But when months turned into years and I was still out there with my chemistry sets and prototype molds, her patience evaporated. "When are you going to turn this into something real?" became her constant refrain. By real, she meant something that would generate the kind of income that could fund her increasingly expensive taste in everything from skincare products to weekend getaways at places that charged $300 for what was essentially a fancy nap with essential oils. What Jessica didn't realize was that I was turning it into something real, just not in the flashy way she expected. While she was networking with other wives who treated their husbands' careers like fashion accessories, I was quietly building relationships with suppliers who were getting nervous about changing environmental regulations. The breakthrough came when a regional grocery chain facing public pressure over packaging waste agreed to test my biodegradable containers in 3 of their stores. That pilot program led to contracts with suppliers across the Pacific Northwest. Within 2 years, I had my first national account. Within 3 years, Kim Eco Solutions was generating enough revenue to fund our entire lifestyle, plus significant reinvestment in research and development. But I'd learned from watching my parents divorce when I was 15. My mother discovered that 30 years of what she thought was building a shared life had actually been 30 years of building my father's life, while her name was mysteriously absent from most important paperwork. She walked away from that marriage with almost nothing except alimony that barely covered her basic expenses. I wasn't going to make that mistake. With help from my business attorney, Patricia Wong, and my accountant, Lisa Chen, I structured everything to protect both my business and my personal assets. The house we lived in was purchased by Kim Eco Solutions as executive housing for business purposes. The luxury cars in our driveway were company fleet vehicles. Even the furniture Jessica spent months selecting was technically corporate assets, purchased to create an appropriate environment for client meetings and business entertainment. On paper, Jessica and I owned very little together except what went into our joint checking account for daily expenses and her personal spending money. Everything else was properly segregated corporate property that had no legal connection to our marriage. The warning signs about Jessica's intentions started appearing about 18 months ago when she joined something called Miranda Foster's Elevation Collective. Miranda was one of those Instagram lifestyle gurus who specialized in convincing women that their perfectly adequate lives were somehow holding them back from reaching their true potential. She ran exclusive gatherings where carefully selected women would discuss intentional living and authentic self-expression, which apparently translated to finding reasons why their current relationships weren't supporting their growth. Jessica came home from her first session buzzing with what she called clarity, but what sounded to me like a checklist of everything supposedly wrong with our marriage. My work schedule was preventing her from creating the kind of entertaining space she needed for meaningful connections. My habit of working from home was limiting her social opportunities. Even my morning routine became problematic. Apparently, the way I prepared coffee was somehow blocking her personal development. The complaints escalated gradually, which I'll give Miranda credit for understanding the importance of pacing when you're convincing someone to destroy their marriage. First, it was suggestions about how I could elevate my presentation, meaning spend money we didn't need to spend on clothes I didn't want to wear. Then it became observations about how my energy was affecting Jessica's ability to step into her power. But the real red flag wasn't the criticism, it was the secrecy. Jessica had always been open about her social life, partly because she enjoyed having an audience for her stories about whatever drama was unfolding in her various social circles. Suddenly, her phone became off-limits territory. She started taking calls outside, claiming they were just checking in with the girls, but speaking in hushed tones usually reserved for planning federal crimes. The late nights started around the same time. Strategy sessions for undefined projects that always seemed to require meeting at wine bars downtown. Sisterhood dinners that left her coming home smelling like expensive perfume and cigarettes, even though Jessica had quit smoking years ago and always complained when others smoked around her. I'm not an idiot. Despite what my current situation might suggest, I could see the pattern forming. I could have confronted her, demanded explanations, made scenes, done all the dramatic husband stuff that probably would have felt satisfying in the moment, but confrontation would have just given Jessica ammunition to paint me as controlling and paranoid, threatened by her personal growth. Instead of confronting, I started documenting. Not in a creepy stalker way, but in a careful, methodical, this might be important later way. I kept receipts for everything, noted when she left and when she came home, paid attention to charges on our credit cards. I also started backing up important communications and creating a comprehensive record of our marriage's slow-motion collapse. I called it Project Restoration, my insurance policy against whatever Jessica was planning. While she was building a case for why our marriage was limiting her potential, I was building a case for why our marriage had been a business partnership with very unequal contributions. My team consisted of Patricia Wong for legal matters, Lisa Chen for financial analysis, and later, when it became clear I needed someone who understood operations and logistics, Robert Martinez, who could ensure any transition happened smoothly and according to proper procedures. The plan was designed to execute within 72 hours if necessary, secure assets, file paperwork, establish legal precedents, and make sure whatever new arrangement Jessica had in mind would have to account for who actually owned what. So when I walked into my kitchen that Tuesday morning and found Kyle wearing my bathrobe like he was auditioning for the world's most comfortable homewrecker, I was prepared. I listened to Jessica's presentation about evolved relationship structures and love without limitations. I watched Kyle nod along like he was participating in some revolutionary social experiment instead of just sleeping with someone else's wife. I poured myself coffee from the machine Jessica claimed was too complicated but had apparently figured out for Kyle's benefit, and asked a single question. Have you two merged your finances yet? The look that passed between them was worth the price of admission. It was the look of two people who'd been so busy planning the emotional logistics of their new arrangement that they hadn't considered boring practical details like who was going to pay for groceries and mortgage payments. We're planning to this week, Jessica said, and I could hear this was the first time she'd committed to a specific timeline for combining her life with Kyle's in ways that went beyond sharing a bed. That's smart, I told them. Financial transparency is important in any relationship. Kyle looked relieved that I was being reasonable about their plans to restructure my existence around their emotional needs. I'm glad you're handling this well, he said. I was worried this might get ugly. Oh, I'm handling it great, I assured him, raising my coffee mug in a mock toast to new arrangements and financial transparency. In fact, I think this calls for a celebration. I'm going to need 72 hours to collect my things. Is that reasonable? Of course, Jessica said, gracious in what she clearly thought was her victory. Take all the time you need. I pulled out my phone and typed 2 words, restoration active. Lisa's response came back immediately, a thumbs up emoji. Time to see how much they really understood about love without limitations. The first 24 hours unfolded with the kind of precision that made me genuinely proud of the planning we'd done. While Jessica and Kyle were probably upstairs picking out matching towels and discussing paint colors, I was in Lisa's office at 6 a.m., watching her work through a checklist that would make a military operation look casual. Temporary restraining orders filed at 8:30, she reported, tapping her tablet with the stylus she insisted was more efficient than using fingers. Patricia has 3 judges she can reach if we need expedited hearings, but the paperwork is solid enough that we shouldn't hit any obstacles unless they try to get creative. Lisa Chen had been my CFO since the early days when Kimiko Solutions consisted of me, a folding table, and a business plan written on coffee shop napkins. She had the kind of methodical approach to numbers that made IRS auditors look sloppy by comparison, plus a master's degree in forensic accounting that proved surprisingly useful when you need to demonstrate that your estranged wife has no legal claim to assets she never actually owned. Personal accounts? I asked, because even though I trusted Lisa with my financial life, I wanted to understand exactly what was happening. Frozen as of midnight, she said with the satisfaction of someone executing a particularly elegant chess move. Your personal salary continues at the documented rate, but all discretionary corporate distributions are suspended pending asset protection procedures. She showed me her tablet screen, where our standard expense reports now looked like classified documents with watermarks identifying them as proprietary corporate information. Anyone attempting to access, copy, or distribute these files without authorization would face legal action from our corporate counsel. The beauty of our approach was its complete legitimacy. Every step was documented, justified, and designed to protect corporate assets from unauthorized access. The fact that these assets happened to include the house where my wife was playing newlyweds with her boyfriend was just a fortunate coincidence, demonstrating the importance of proper business planning. Meanwhile, according to security system notifications on my phone, Jessica and Kyle were having a relaxed morning. Motion sensors showed them moving through the house like they owned it, which I suppose they thought they did. The kitchen camera caught Kyle making coffee in my machine, and I had to admit, there was something satisfying about knowing every cup he drank was funded by corporate assets he had no legal claim to. Around noon, I got a text from Jessica that made me laugh out loud. David, the insurance company called asking about policy verification. Can you call them back? I showed the message to Lisa, who grinned like someone who just won a hand of poker. Corporate policy, she explained. Business owned, business managed, business insured. She's not on the policy because she's not an employee or board member. I texted back, corporate matter, Lisa will handle. Jessica's response was immediate. What do you mean, corporate matter? I didn't respond. There's something beautiful about letting people discover the implications of careful planning in real time. Day 2 started with what had to be the politest asset recovery operation in history. At exactly 9 a.m., a moving truck arrived at the corporate property currently occupied by my estranged wife and her bathrobe-wearing boyfriend. 3 uniformed movers began systematically loading my legitimate work equipment while I supervised with my clipboard and inventory list. Kyle emerged first, still wearing my robe because apparently he decided to make it his signature look. He had that confused expression people get when trying to solve puzzles slightly beyond their skill level. What's happening here? He asked, maintaining his casual, I belong here tone despite clearly starting to realize he might not understand the situation as well as he'd assumed. Collecting work equipment, I explained, gesturing toward movers, carefully loading my laser cutter onto a dolly. Company property can't be left sitting around unattended. The laser cutter was followed by my heat press, industrial scale, label printer, and 6 boxes of prototype materials that probably looked like mad scientist garage sale contents to anyone who didn't understand their purpose. Kyle watched this parade of equipment like he was trying to figure out whether this was normal or concerning. I could practically see wheels turning as he processed that what he'd assumed was hobby equipment was being treated like actual business infrastructure. A lot of toys for a grown man, he said finally, trying to convince himself more than me. I smiled the way you do when someone reveals they don't understand the difference between toys and tools. Yeah, I agreed. Very expensive toys. Jessica appeared looking like she'd dressed for a photo shoot about successful women having casual mornings, an outfit that looked effortless but probably took 45 minutes to assemble. She surveyed the moving operation with the expression of someone beginning to suspect the game she thought she was playing had more rules than she'd realized. David, what is this? She asked, and there was an edge suggesting she was starting to understand that my agreeable response yesterday might not have been as simple as she'd thought. Corporate asset recovery, I told her, consulting my clipboard like I was reading from a script. Kim Eco Solutions needs to consolidate equipment and materials for an upcoming audit. Standard business procedure. Everything I said was technically true. We did have an audit coming up. I'd scheduled it myself yesterday morning. We did need to consolidate assets. It was good business practice. And everything we were moving was genuinely corporate property with no business sitting in someone's garage indefinitely. While movers loaded the last equipment, Patricia Wong arrived with what she cheerfully called the documentation package, a 3-inch binder that could double as a weapon. She had the methodical approach to paperwork that made government bureaucracy look efficient. "Mrs. Kim," she said with professional courtesy reserved for delivering unwanted news. "I have documents clarifying ownership status of various items on this property. Would you like to review them now, or would you prefer your attorney present?" Jessica stared at Patricia like she was speaking a foreign language, which she was, the language of proper business documentation and legal precedent that most people never deal with until it becomes suddenly, urgently relevant. "What kind of documents?" Jessica asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Patricia opened the binder with reverence usually reserved for unveiling art. Purchase agreements, insurance documentation, board minutes authorizing major expenditures, vehicle lease agreements, and corporate tax filings showing depreciation schedules for business assets, she explained, flipping through pages like conducting a museum tour. Everything clarifying which items are corporate property versus personal property. Kyle peered over Jessica's shoulder at the documentation, and I watched his face cycle through several interesting expressions as he realized the house he'd been treating like his bachelor pad was actually corporate retreat property owned by a business neither he nor Jessica had any legal connection to. "This is about the house," he said. "Not a question." "Among other things," Patricia confirmed cheerfully. "The residence, vehicles, most furniture and appliances, the art collection, even the espresso machine. All corporate assets purchased for business purposes and properly documented." Jessica took the binder with careful movements of someone handling potential explosives. She flipped through pages, trying to process implications of what she was seeing. "David," she said finally, her voice having lost yesterday morning's confident edge. "We need to talk." "Of course," I told her. "My attorney will contact you to schedule a convenient time for all parties." That's when Miranda Foster pulled up in her white BMW, because apparently this morning needed another layer of comedy. She exited like making an entrance at a charity gala, all flowing scarves and designer sunglasses, and confidence that comes from never facing actual consequences. "Jessica, darling," she called out, completely ignoring the moving truck, boxes of corporate assets, and general atmosphere of a life being systematically reorganized. "I brought those color swatches for the kitchen redesign we discussed." I offered to pour her coffee from the corporate espresso machine because I'm nothing if not hospitable to guests on corporate property. She declined with the dismissive wave you give service staff, telling me everything I needed to know about how she viewed my role in whatever renovation fantasies she and Jessica had been planning. "Actually," I told her, "you might want to hold off on kitchen plans. Property management decisions need corporate board approval now." Miranda's confusion was almost worth the admission price to this circus. She glanced around at the moving operation, Patricia's documentation binder, Jessica's increasingly pale complexion, trying to figure out how the morning's script had changed without anyone telling her. I texted Lisa. "Stage 2. Her response was immediate. "Vendor notices deploying now." By afternoon, Jessica was discovering that the house insurance company wasn't the only business relationship that had been restructured overnight. The lawn service, grocery delivery company, housekeeping service, and pool maintenance crew all received official notices that Mrs. Kim was no longer authorized to make account changes or authorize charges. Kyle's phone started buzzing, with the insistent frequency that usually means someone's about to have a very bad day at work. He stepped outside to take the call, pacing around the front yard making hand gestures people make when trying to explain why something that looks really bad isn't actually as bad as it appears. Turns out it was worse than it looked. "Compliance department," he announced when he returned, face gone, that particular shade of pale people get when their professional life is about to become much more complicated than planned. "They want to see me first thing tomorrow about conflict of interest disclosures I apparently should have filed, but didn't." Patricia didn't look up from her legal pad. Dating a married woman while advising her on financial matters affecting your living situation probably qualifies as a personal conflict, requiring disclosure to your firm's ethics board, she observed with the casual tone of someone discussing weather. Most financial advisory firms take that seriously. Someone had apparently compiled a comprehensive report on Kyle's recent activities and submitted it to his firm's compliance department, along with thorough analysis of relevant ethical guidelines. I had no idea who might have done such a thing. Jessica was having communication problems of her own, though hers involved sudden, complete silence from people who used to return her calls immediately. Miranda Foster, so enthusiastic about kitchen renovations just hours earlier, had apparently developed selective amnesia regarding Jessica's phone number. Her texts went unanswered, calls went to voicemail, and her social media posts got the kind of polite non-engagement people use when distancing themselves from complicated situations. Other members of Miranda's elevation circle followed suit with coordinated abandonment, suggesting they'd all received the same memo about maintaining appropriate distance from messy situations. These were women who built their social identity around surrounding themselves with success and aspiration. Discovering that one of their members had less actual wealth than a typical community college graduate made them nervous about their own carefully maintained images. Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor who'd been watching this drama unfold from her porch like personal entertainment, didn't hide her satisfaction when she saw Jessica loading suitcases into a rideshare vehicle. "Told you that boy was too quiet for his own good," she called out, her voice carrying across the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen had been living next door for 25 years and had developed radar for relationship dynamics from decades of watching people's lives play out in driveways and front yards. The rideshare took Jessica to Kyle's apartment, a studio in one of those buildings, marketing itself as urban living for young professionals, but actually meaning expensive shoebox with pretensions. The plan had apparently been for Kyle to abandon his lease and move into what they'd assumed would be their shared house. But corporate asset protection has a way of disrupting even the best-laid domestic plans. 2 days later, when Kyle's studio proved too small for two people dealing with the stress that comes from having your life plan collapse in 72 hours, Jessica moved again. This time to her sister Monica's couch, representing the kind of lifestyle downgrade probably difficult to explain to the elevation circle, assuming any were still taking her calls. By Thursday evening, when Robert Martinez drove by and honked once in what I interpreted as a victory salute, I actually exhaled completely for the first time in 3 days. There was something deeply satisfying about sitting in my own living room, in my own house, drinking coffee from my own machine without worrying about whose bathrobe was hanging in my bathroom or whose breakfast plans were disrupting my morning routine. The divorce conference went about as well as expected when one side comes prepared with documentation binders and the other arrives with righteous indignation and fundamental misunderstanding of corporate law. Judge Rodriguez handled enough cases to recognize the difference between legitimate marital property disputes and fishing expeditions. She reviewed our asset documentation with the speed of someone who'd seen this movie before. "Counsel," she told Jessica's attorney after 10 minutes reviewing our paperwork, "your client appears to have confused familiarity with ownership. The court sees no basis for claiming marital property rights to assets clearly held by a separate corporate entity." She ordered immediate vacation of the property and non-interference with corporate assets. Legal language for get out and don't touch anything. She also noted that future attempts to claim ownership of clearly documented corporate property could result in sanctions. Legal language for don't waste the court's time with this again. Kyle's firm placed him on administrative leave pending full review of his client relationships and disclosure practices. Corporate language for we're figuring out how much trouble you've caused before deciding whether to fire you quietly or loudly. His supervisor wasn't impressed with Kyle's explanation about providing informal rather than formal financial planning services, since informal advice affecting your living situation still qualifies as conflict of interest under professional ethics codes. The divorce paperwork came through with bureaucratic efficiency that makes you appreciate living in a society where legal processes actually work, even if they take forever. Clean, quick, and mind-numbingly boring. Exactly how I wanted it. No drama, no contested hearings, no angry depositions. Just signatures, filing fees, and procedural tedium that transforms life-changing events into paperwork. Jessica received her share of legitimate marital property, which the court determined was roughly equivalent to what most people spend on a decent used car. Her personal checking account, remnants of her 401k, some jewelry that appraised for less than hoped, and half our joint account. Total, just under $18,000. Probably not what she expected when deciding to restructure our marriage around her lifestyle goals. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the exact spot where Kyle once held court in my bathrobe. Except now I'm sketching designs for a revolutionary closed-loop packaging system that could replace every styrofoam container in America. The kitchen island where my wife's boyfriend ate my breakfast while wearing my clothes is now my primary workspace for building something that might change an entire industry. The business keeps growing in surprising ways. We hired 3 apprentices from the local technical college, students studying environmental science who look at our prototype equipment like it's the key to solving the world's packaging problems. They ask questions pushing me to consider applications I hadn't thought of, and their enthusiasm reminds me why I started this whole project. I also established a scholarship in my grandmother's name at the college, funding tuition for students who want to study sustainable technology but can't afford full educational costs. The first recipient is a single father returning to school after 15 years in retail, and he sends progress reports every semester like I'm proud family. In a way, I suppose I am. We're all part of this extended family of people who think technology should solve problems instead of creating them. I've started making bread on Sundays, partly because I enjoy the process, and partly because Mrs. Chen mentioned missing the smell of home baking since her husband died. Every Sunday evening, I walk across the yard with fresh loaves, and we sit on her porch discussing neighborhood gossip and the state of the world. Last week, she asked me to fix her porch light, flickering for months, and I spent an hour rewiring her fixture while she told stories about previous owners of my house and their various domestic dramas. "Your arrangement seems to be working out better than theirs did," she said while I tightened wire nuts. There was something deeply satisfying about being known in the neighborhood as the guy whose arrangement actually works. The prototype I'm perfecting tonight could be the breakthrough we've been building toward for years. A fiber-based container strong enough for hot soup, waterproof enough for salad dressing, and completely biodegradable under standard composting conditions. More importantly, it can be manufactured using existing equipment with minimal modifications, meaning adoption could happen quickly once we prove the economics work. My phone buzzes with a call from an unknown number, the same unknown number that's been calling every few weeks for 2 months. I let it go to voicemail like always, because whatever Jessica wants to discuss at this point probably isn't worth disrupting my evening routine. The voicemail will be polite and carefully neutral, asking if we can catch up or have a conversation about moving forward. I'll delete it without responding like I've deleted all the others. Some conversations don't need to happen. Some bridges are supposed to stay burned. Outside, the neighborhood settles into its evening rhythm. Mrs. Chen's porch light casts warm circles across her yard. The couple 2 houses down walks their dog on the same route they take nightly. The teenager across the street practices skateboard tricks in his driveway, wheels on concrete creating steady percussion that's somehow soothing rather than annoying. This is what I was building toward all along, even when I didn't know it. Not just business success or financial security. Though those matter, not just the satisfaction of solving technical problems or creating something that might make the world better, though that's important too. What I was really building toward was this: quiet satisfaction of sitting in my own house, working on something I care about, surrounded by a life that makes sense without requiring constant negotiation or compromise. Jessica was right about one thing that morning 6 months ago. I did need to accept a new arrangement. I accepted it, just not the way she thought I would. My arrangement involves discipline and paperwork and the quiet power that comes from understanding exactly where you stand and what you own. It involves a business worth $14.2 million that exists because I chose to build something meaningful instead of maintaining appearances. It involves apprentices excited about changing the world, neighbors who know they can count on me, and scholarship recipients who send thank you notes I keep in a file labeled "Reasons This Matters." Most importantly, my arrangement involves the freedom to sit in my own kitchen on Sunday evenings, working on problems that interest me without wondering who's going to walk through the door wearing my clothes and eating my breakfast. Kyle was right about one thing. We are all adults here. Some of us just understand what that actually means.